All right, our last video for chapter 15, we're going to discuss virulence factors. Okay? Virulence factors typically are going to be the trait associated with our pathogen that makes our pathogen a pathogen. All right? And I just received an award for using pathogen as many times as I could in one sentence. All right? But essentially what we're talking about with virulence factors, all right, a lot of times it's going to be a protein or an enzyme that is made by the bacteria. And in terms of making those enzymes or those proteins, all right, you can have essentially a toxin that's produced, all right? And in terms of that, we're going to have endotoxins and we've got exotoxins. All right, the blue that I have here, this is our bacteria. And typically what we're talking about with endotoxins, all right, I'll put the pink on here. This will be our cell wall. Endotoxins are primarily going to be made by gram-negative bacteria, okay? And essentially that endotoxin is a portion of that LPS layer, that lipopolysaccharide layer. What happens as that bacteria infects you, the host, your immune system comes in and starts destroying some of that gram-negative bacteria. In destroying that gram-negative bacteria, it's releasing part of the LPS, that lipopolysaccharide, and that lipopolysaccharide is our endotoxin, all right? This is actually the part of the gram-negative bacteria that'll make you sick, all right? And in terms of endotoxins, typically, all right, the dose on that for it to be lethal, so the LD50 is fairly large, okay? So you need to have a lot of membrane broken down and being shed in order to make someone that sick that it ends up being lethal. Exotoxins, on the other hand, typically are made by gram-positive bacteria. The lethal dose tends to be much smaller that's associated with that. In this case, the exotoxin that's made by the gram-positive bacteria, it's part of its genome, it makes that exotoxin, and it secretes it outside of the bacteria. Okay? And in terms of that exotoxin, all right, typically with those gram-positive bacteria, it's the exotoxin that makes you sick, all right? One particular type of bacteria is going to be Clostridium Botulinum, all right? Clostridium botulinum makes the botulism toxin, all right? And if you've ever heard of Botox, that's essentially what those ladies who, or gentlemen, I shouldn't be discriminatory, get injected into their muscles to kind of get rid of wrinkles, all right? Essentially, that Clostridium botulinum makes a toxin that results in muscle paralysis. So it interferes with things at the neuromuscular junction, prevents the muscle from contracting. If you can't contract your muscle, you can't get those lines and wrinkles that are associated with aging, okay? But in terms of that botulism toxin is an example of an exotoxin. The bacteria secretes that toxin, and it's the toxin actually that makes us sick, all right? And in terms of that, with our exotoxins, endotoxins, okay? Most of the time, the gram-negatives are going to be endotoxins, gram-positive are going to be exotoxins, all right? So in terms of our virulence factors, the toxins are one example of a virulence factor. They're not the only virulence factor that's out there, though, okay? You can have other enzymes that bacteria can make, all right? The hemolysins, made by strep pyogenes, that's going to break open red blood cells. That's an example of a virulence factor, all right? It essentially is what makes us sick, all right? Another common virulence factor is coagulase, all right? Coagulase causes essentially activation of the clotting cascade. And what it does is those bacteria that release coagulase cause essentially a clot to form around the outside of the bacteria. That clot now has the ability to evade the immune system. That's what allows that bacteria to survive. Because remember, in our stages of infection, survival is one of the goals of our bacteria. They need to survive so that they can replicate. Coagulase is a virulence factor, an example of how that happens, okay? There are a number of other types of enzymes that I have listed in the PowerPoint that I want you to be familiar with. But in terms of that, virulence factors are really something that alter the bacteria, that allow them to essentially cause damage within the human body, okay? So if you have any questions, please